Hello, and welcome to Wesley United Methodist Church of Trenton, Missouri. Our church is located at 113 East 9th Street, which is on the corner of 9th and Washington in Trenton, Missouri. You can call our office between the hours of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, Monday through Friday at 660-359-6762, or visit our website at wesleyunitedmethodist.us. Now we invite you to open your heart, mind, and body to the Word of God with Reverend Barry Boulware.
We are in the 8th chapter of John. We begin with the first verse. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act. In the law of Moses, we are commanded to stone such a woman. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you." Jesus declared, "Go now and leave your life of sin." May God truly bless this holy written word. Did you catch that one verse we just sang? "Oh, let him have the things that hold you, and his spirit like a dove will descend upon your heart, your life, and make you whole." Give him the things that hold you. We soon begin the season of Lent where we give up and where we give over to God. There's a tombstone somewhere in our nation that is quite unique. There's only one word engraved upon this stone. Usually you would find the person's name with a birth date and with the date of death. Sometimes you'll find a nickname, and sometimes there might be a loving expression engraved upon stones, like loving grandmother or trusted friend to all. But that's not what's engraved on this stone. The one word just says, forgiven. Forgiven. And keep in mind, though some people pick out their stones ahead of time, someone else had to decide to put that word forgiven on this stone because the deceased was the one forgiven. It didn't say forgiver, but forgiven. And that's all. And I guess we'll never learn the details or the story behind that tombstone, but it would be interesting, wouldn't it? Short of the birth stories and the death stories about Jesus, today's story is my favorite in the Bible. I try to preach upon it once a year. Those of you who are faithful in attendance have probably heard me over 10 times preach upon this text. It has been called the gospel in miniature. Each time Jesus traveled to Jerusalem, he was assured of harassment by the religious elite. On one such visit, he approached the temple early in the morning, only to be confronted by a particular cynical group of Pharisees. "We've got Jesus cornered this time," they must have said to themselves. will put him in a position of either having to ascribe to the law or to take sides with a sinner. Either way, he'll end up with egg on his face. Earlier that day, these men had intentionally caught a woman in sin. She would be the very way that they tried to entrap Jesus. Dragging the woman to the town square, the Pharisees said to Jesus, "This woman has just been caught in immorality. Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. What do you say?" The men smugly waited for a reply. That's when Jesus did something unusual, very unusual. In fact, we have no record of him doing this very thing ever again. He knelt down to the ground and he began to write something with his finger in the dirt. We don't know what he wrote in the dirt. Wouldn't you love to know? I would. Then he stood up to face the woman's accusers. There was stone cold silence. This, no doubt, perturbed the Pharisees. "Well, Jesus, what's your answer?" they asked again. "What do you have to say this time?" They were annoyed that he did not quickly step directly into their neatly laid trap. Jesus must have allowed their anxiety to reach a fever pitch before giving his answer. And then it was when Jesus calmly said, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw the first stone." Then Jesus knelt back down to the ground and began to write in the dirt again. Not daring to look at one another, they each dropped their rocks that they had picked up along the way and silently shuffled off. The crowd of onlookers, they didn't know what to do either. The woman was left standing alone with Jesus. He looked at her. He knew she had lived down to the low expectations that other people had for her. Would he lecture her about sinfulness? Women in that day were not highly regarded, which is one of the reasons Jesus captures us so completely. He regarded women as high can be. She probably thought to herself by now, "Go ahead, tell me what I need to hear. I'm a nobody who deserves nothing but scorn. Ask around. Anyone who knows me will tell you that. I'm a loser and I've got it coming to me." "Woman," Jesus said, "where are your accusers? Has no one stayed to condemn you?" What a strange question it seems at first. But wait, Jesus is making a point here. Those men were so eager to leave. They said nothing more about her. No doubt they were fuming inside when they left because their trap had failed. But they said nothing to this woman when they left. Shaking her head, she said, "There's no one left to accuse me." And Jesus calmly said, "Neither do I. I do not condemn you. So go, but sin no more." His words must have caught her completely off guard. That's it? No lecture? No scolding? Jesus walked away. Today's story reveals Jesus as the standard bearer for grace, God's unmerited favor. I'd like to think that I'd respond as Jesus did, but I know myself well enough to admit that forgiveness is not always my first reaction. Several years ago, a colleague of mine told me a story about the time when he loaned a friend some money, but that friend never repaid him. And my colleague asked and asked and asked, But the friend decided he just was never going to repay that loan. Not only did my colleague lose his money in that regard, but the friendship was lost as well. My colleague said to me, forgiveness seemed too good to him. After all, he had cheated me. You ever feel that way about someone else? Have you ever been disappointed by someone and all efforts to remedy the problem failed? It's difficult to live with those kinds of loose ends, isn't it? Jesus had the satisfaction of knowing that this woman would appreciate what he could offer her. He knew that inside. I wish I knew what crossed Jesus' mind when the Pharisees dragged the woman to him. His views about marriage and lust and purity of thought, they were all well known. Jesus was a man of strong conviction. Yet, in spite of the fact that this woman had lived the exact opposite of everything Jesus had taught, he openly expressed tenderness and forgiveness to her. How unpredictable this must have seemed to those who thought they had him figured out. Above all else, Christianity is about relationships. Honest relationships. That's something Jesus knew, and it is something the Pharisees knew nothing about. One day, a certain father got into trouble, a horrible argument with his 2 teenage kids. Apparently, they had not cleaned up their rooms to his satisfaction, and he unloaded on them. He went too far this time. Later on the day, his wife said to him, "You have a decision to make. Do you want to be right, or do you want a relationship with your kids?" Something like that happened with Jesus and this woman. Had she been wrong? Of course. For that matter, the Pharisees had been wrong too, but they no longer were around. They ran off. And while we're on the subject, where's the man? He was wrong too, but he never showed up. What Jesus gave this woman was grace, unmerited grace. Had she deserved it? No! No, she didn't deserve what Jesus gave to her, but deserve has got nothing to do with grace. And that's the hidden secret about grace. It can't be earned. It can't be deserved. Grace is not ever some kind of entitlement. Grace tells you not so much about the one who receives it, but tells you much about the one who gives it. Here's the important thing, and honestly, it's not something we can do by ourselves. We will need God's help. Find opportunities where you can be a giver of grace. It would be a mistake to think that only God can bestow grace. That would be wrong to think that. It's just not true. Every person in this room can be a giver of grace, but God's help will be needed. We will need to see people as God sees them, not simply through the lenses of our own preset judgments. And God will help us see people with new insight if we truly want to become grace-filled persons. Grace is made possible only as we genuinely identify with the one receiving it. This may create a question in your mind. You might ask, are you suggesting that Jesus identified personally with the sinful woman's misdeeds? No, I'm not suggesting that. But Jesus did identify with her need for affirmation and for appreciation. Her means of fulfilling these were poor. But rather than honing in on her poor coping skills, he identified with her need for genuine love. Read the Gospels. With whom did Jesus spend his time, share his teachings, perform his miracles? With just a few exceptions, they were with people that we could categorize as being the least and the last and the lost. How far do we have to go in this community before we see the least and the last and the lost? Not very far. And here's the important thing to remember. We don't have to leave this room, because sooner or later, you and I are part of the least or the last or the lost. Have a doctor give you one word about your health exam, and you are part of the lost. It happens that quickly. Or the woman who comes home to her family and says, I lost my job today. We become the least and the last and the lost ourselves. And it can happen in the snap of a finger. The more we walk with Jesus, the more he begins to, as I've said through this sermon series, the more he begins to what? Rub off on us. Rub off. Peggy and I were cooking this week. Have you ever cooked with garlic? It rubs off, doesn't it? And it stays on your fingers. That's what Jesus Christ is like. He rubs off onto us his character, his true DNA. Divine as it is, divine DNA can begin to wrap itself around us. Sure, we have our weak points. Of course, we carry our bruises from battles that have been fought. And certainly we've had our moments when we were so caught up in ourselves that we overlook the walking wounded all around us, who hunger for affection and understanding and love and forgiveness. We are those people. But that's no reason for us to stop our walk with Jesus. In fact, those are the very reasons that we need his grace all the more. We can't give away something that we don't have ourselves. We can't be a grace-filled person and give that grace to others if we first haven't been given it ourselves. You and I need God's favor if we're going to act favorably to others. The fundamental difference between Christians is not so much a knowledge of the Bible or the lack of knowledge, or faithful stewardship to the church, or even attendance in worship. The fundamental difference is whether grace has been received and then grace has been given away. Grace is like a circle. It is a way of coming back to the very place where it started. Give grace away and grace will return to you. It will find you again. That's how God designs it. Someone recently wrote an article entitled 9 Words Women Use. It's a tongue-in-cheek article. However, you'll see some truth in it. Now, ladies, keep in mind, my wife brought this article to me, and she used it already as she spoke to a Rotary Club. Okay? Listen to these 9 things that women say. Women use the following words. Have you ever heard a woman say, fine? This is the word women use to end an argument when they are right and you, the man, need to sit down and be silent. Have you ever heard a woman say, 5 minutes? If she's getting dressed, this means you have another half hour. But 5 minutes is only 5 minutes if you've been watching TV, a football game, and she now wants you to begin the honey-do list around the house. Have you ever heard a woman say, "Oh, nothing"? This is the calm before the storm. This means something, and men, you should be on your toes. Have you ever heard a woman say, "Go ahead"? This is a dare. It is not permission. Don't do it. Have you ever heard a lady give a loud This is actually a word, but it's a nonverbal statement, often misunderstood by us men. A loud sigh means she thinks you are mentally challenged and she wonders why she continues to waste her time trying to explain it to you. Yes. Have you ever heard a woman say, "Oh, that's okay"? This is one of the most dangerous statements a woman can make to a man. It means she wants to think long and hard before deciding how and when you will pay for your mistake. Have you ever heard a woman say, "Thanks"? A woman is thanking you. Do not question it or faint. Just say back, "You're welcome." This is true unless she says, "Thanks a lot." That is pure sarcasm, and she's not thanking you at all. Do not say "you're welcome" to that. That will only lead her to say, "Whatever." Number 8, whatever. Men, you really don't want to know what this word honestly means to her. And 9, don't worry about it. I've got it. This is another dangerous statement, meaning this is something she's told you to do several times, but now she's going to do it herself. This will later result in a man asking, "Honey, what's wrong?" To which the woman will reply, "Nothing." Communication can be tricky. Did you notice in this story how Jesus spoke the language of the woman? He knew what she needed. None of those other men had a clue, but he did. Which of these words do you think were the most important to the woman? He who is without sin, cast that first stone. Where are your accusers to condemn you? Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Which of those words do you think were the most important to that woman? I think to understand any one of these 4 statements of Jesus, you'll need to see all 4 of them together. Only then can we truly see grace that is given and grace that is received. So I encourage you to be extravagant with giving grace to other people. Let grace be in your Christian DNA. It never means that you must approve of something done wrong, but it does mean that you value that other person more than you value perfection. Amen.
Thank you for joining us on our pre-recorded Sunday morning service. If you would like a copy, you can contact the office at 660-359-6762 or email us at wesleyum@sbcglobal.net. Feel free to visit us in person or online at wesleyunitedmethodist.us, where you will always find open hearts, open minds, and open doors. May the blessings of Jesus Christ be upon you in every aspect of your life.